All right, you have joined the Monday edition of the Frank Figliuzzi Show. Let me introduce my guest, Frank Figliuzzi. Yeah, you've heard him, you know him, and you're gonna hear more from him during the next 45 minutes to 55 minutes, folks. I hope you had a good weekend. The weekend was filled with news, and we're going to go over the highlights or lowlights as they are. And boy, it'll go from the sublime to the ridiculous, and including the scary. But I wanted to open with something that's gotten a lot of attention, and that's something that affects us even at our dinner table, because it's about what we eat, purchase at the grocery store, and that, of course, is this Cyclospora outbreak that now involves thousands of Americans being very, very sick with intestinal distress that could last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, folks. And what's new on this over the last few days? First, we learned, of course, that the FDA and CDC, working with state inspectors, was reportedly able to identify Cyclospora parasite DNA in lettuce samples from the Taylor Farms location in Mexico. The size and scope of this operation really is daunting. I mean, when you look at all of the various produce, they're not just a lettuce producer. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the scope of this operation, because it's enormous. And there, but all your green, fresh produce at many stores, from Walmart to Trader Joe's, and then retail commercial restaurants like Taco Bell. I've even seen reference to Cisco, which is a major institutional food provider, saying that they're pulling their fresh produce. It's big. And the CDC and/or FDA was able to isolate some Cyclospora parasite evidence from a lettuce sample or two from Taylor Farms location in Mexico. And for those of you that have ever been in the risk mitigation business, risk assessment business, and I have, at a big corporate level, you never want a huge single source of your main bread and butter, no pun intended. And in this case, I think we're finding that many of the businesses we frequent have essentially a single source. And Taco Bell, I guess to their credit, had told their share owners, and they're owned by Yum Brands, a huge conglomerate, they had actually listed as their top risk to their share owners in a recent statement, corporate statement. And companies do this, by the way. A good, healthy company does assess their risks. And part of risk management is to say, where do we get, what would really kill us? What would take us out of the business? And that's often linked to what do we depend on so much that is largely a single source supply chain? There's your problem right there, right? That can take you down if that single source goes down. And you know what Taco Bell listed for their share owners and investors? Cyclospora. They knew it. They knew it. It's been there before, been there, done that, and they kudos to them. Now, what they did about that, right, and whether they instituted independent testing, I do not know, but they knew it and they identified it. But nonetheless, here we are. Here's the news. We know that last week, Taylor Farms actually was granted a meeting at the White House, presumably, according to reports, with FDA officials. And lo and behold, what do we learn this morning in the news? That Taylor Farms is announcing that it received an apology. I'm using their language in their corporate press statement, proudly proclaiming, we have received an apology from the FDA because we've all discovered that the testing that was done involved a false positive. Again, their language, not mine. Now, when you start scratching this false positive, things get very interesting. First, we now know from Wall Street Journal and other reporting, including a great website called Open Secrets. If you're not familiar with the website called Open Secrets, I recommend you take a look if you ever want to know who's donated to who, what corporate donations look like. And we know now that at least from late November 2024 and reporting through the 24-25 cycle, where corporate entities are required to show what their employees, what their families, and what their related PACs, political action committee affiliations, have donated around the marketplace. And we now know that in that cycle, Taylor Farms donated reportedly, and I'm getting this from Wall Street Journal and from Open Secrets, at least $1 million to Republican causes, MAGA entities, and Trump-related and Trump-endorsed campaigns and candidates. Now, that's not to say, as most corporations, that they didn't also donate to Democrats or Democratic causes, but there's no comparison. Everybody tries to play one end against the middle, cover all the bases, hedge your bets, right? But there's no hedging here. They are over the top on far-right Republican donations and causes. So, and by the way, thank you to one of my Substack followers for pointing out that the initial report and the regulations that I was quoting don't precisely say that Taylor Farms wrote a check on Taylor Farms bank accounts, because that's actually not allowed. But the way companies get around that is through encouraging. I've been a part of this, by the way, in my corporate life after the FBI, through strongly encouraging their executives to donate to the following causes and the following PACs that we've created and lobbying groups. So that, I want to be precise there. And thank you to the Substack follower who did that, because it caused me to edit slightly and then to attach the Open Secrets reporting of everywhere the Taylor Farms entities donated. So that kind of influence under ordinary circumstances would cause us all to go, holy cow, are you paying for influence? Are you paying for deregulation? Are you paying to change the FDA's finding that, oh, sorry, we had a false positive? But under this administration, folks, you know what I'm about to say. Yeah, it's pay to play. It's absolutely pay to play. So on Friday, the company said the information that the FDA had presented at this White House meeting. I don't get to pick up the phone and get a White House meeting. I don't know about you, but I haven't given $1 million to Republican causes either. They questioned the White House and FDA decision to remove iceberg lettuce from the market. And I want to cover a couple of things. One, we need to get better at monitoring corporate entities and who they're giving money to. Corporate entities that are regulated, and that's most corporate entities, right? Second, there is reporting that as far back as last year, regulations were changed for the kind of monitoring and regulatory environment that would affect Taylor Farms. I'm sure we're going to be looking at that far more deeply, folks, about whether, because that would be strong evidence, wouldn't it, of a quid pro quo, if somebody could find that donations equaled deregulation. That would be something else. But here's what we do know for a fact. The Centers for Disease Control in the second Trump administration had a full-blown foodborne illness unit whose job it was to monitor foodborne parasites. A rather long list, fairly long list. I think it's under a dozen, but it's something like 8 to 10 to 12. We are now down because of cuts. And it almost sounds naive for me to say because of cuts, like the cuts had to happen, right? Or that it was all Elon Musk's fault. But this kind of donation environment, right? It's always about money. Raises now the question of whether the cuts were as willy-nilly or random as we think the Doge cuts were. And I think good investigative journalism has to dig into exactly who decided that CDC's foodborne illness program, which has a name, by the way, it's called FoodNet. FoodNet is a robust program where the goal of the program is to really look at trends over time to inform our policy and prevention activities. Okay, thank you. I like that. But really, was it random cuts that caused the CDC to go down to only monitoring two foodborne illness parasites? And guess what one of those parasites that was cut for monitoring is? It is indeed Cyclospora. I don't know if this is random ignorance or if this had to do with certain companies going, hey, knock it off with the Cyclospora stuff. You're killing us here. I don't know. But now they literally could be killing us if certain foodborne parasites are not monitored anymore. But we know that for a fact. So we're diminished. We're left to rely a lot on state monitoring. And some of these state inspection services are doing yeoman's work on this case. Michigan, for example, really deserves a lot of credit here. So where the federal government has lapsed, certain states with the capability and resources to do it have stepped up. The other thing we know, in addition to the fact that Cyclospora is not monitored anymore under the CDC, is that, let me pull this up here. Hang on a second. Oh, yeah. All right. We know that the owner of Taylor Farms has reportedly been quite the Republican GOP advocate over the years. And what the FDA is now saying to reporters, and some of this is source information, is that with regard to this so-called false positive, that only pertains to one sample of iceberg lettuce at Taylor Farms, but that the other sample or samples, plural, that were taken from Taylor Farms were indeed positive for Cyclospora. And if you want a clue, right, because in my business, we call these clues, as to whether you no longer need to be concerned about Taylor food lettuce, understand something. The recall of Taylor Foods lettuce is still in effect. So to me, without any scientific or medical background, I have the same scientific and medical credentials as, say, RFK Jr., which is to say none. It looks to me like this is an appeasement. We're going to keep, how can we keep Taylor Farms happy? Because we want to keep that donation money flowing. And how can we still protect the public? We'll say one of our samples was a false positive, and we'll keep the recall in effect. I think that's happening. That's my opinion. The other thing, if you want to get into, and again, you get what you pay for medical advice and scientific advice from me, but here's what I'm reading in the reports. This is coming from FDA and other experts. Trying to explain that false positive. So here's what Taylor Farms has taken issue with. It's the testing procedure that they take issue with. And that is, if I understand correctly, the sample that's being called a false positive is really not a false positive, which means to say that they initially test the lettuce for any DNA that's not supposed to be on lettuce. And it's easy to say, aha, we found Cyclospora DNA, there it is, we're done, if you find it on your first test, which is a very basic kind of grab of DNA that pops out at you under laboratory conditions. But good testing, and this is what was done, keeps going by expanding the DNA sample. So they grow it more and more and more, and then they saw Cyclospora pop. They saw Cyclospora DNA after multiple rounds of growing the DNA that was present there. And I think, if I understand this correctly, that is the main issue that Taylor Farms is taking issue with, which is, oh yeah, sure, if you keep growing DNA, you'll find feces. Well, yes, but then they're saying, well, that's not right. We don't like that, and so somehow that's turned into the phrase false positive. That's my layman's understanding of this, and that's where we are, folks. Questioning literally what we can buy and put on our dinner table, or where we can eat, and whether or not money resulted in this false positive apology that Taylor Farms is trumpeting right now. No pun intended on the word trumpeting, folks, but stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be digging in more. All right. Our number 2 story today is the breaking news. And again, some of you have pointed this out to me, and I said, yep, I got to cover this. This is scary stuff, folks. If you think Cyclospora is scary, how about this? How about the Justice Department has just activated a never before utilized court for alien, quote, alien terrorist deportations. Whenever you hear never before used court, you should pay attention. All right. So I want to give you the news on this as it's coming in late yesterday and today. The Trump administration has filed a first ever petition, bells and whistles right there, to a secretive and dormant court created 30 years ago to consider government requests to deport so-called alien terrorists from the United States. Now, again, at first blush, you go, yeah, I don't want any alien terrorists here. Yeah, get them out. Why has this court never been used before? Sounds like a good idea. The Alien Terrorist Removal Court was established in 1996, but yes, I'm reading because this is new to me too, but had never received a petition until this past Wednesday, when the Justice Department filed an application seeking the removal of an individual whose name is withheld. So we have no idea who this is, from the single-page document, a single-page document posted on the court's website. How does this work, you might ask? The chief judge of the 5-member court. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but there have been times in my career where I've been named to panels, inquiry boards, and I've been told, Frank, you and these other folks, you're going to be activated, but we've never used it. This is like a complete emergency situation, and you're likely to go through your whole tenure in this position without having to show up for this panel. Well, I imagine you're one of these 5-member judges on this so-called alien deportation court, and you've forgotten about this long ago, right? You're like, yeah, fine, give me the briefing, and I get it. I'll never be called. And boom, last week, here we go, right? Oh yeah, remember I named you to this court? No, you're on it. Okay. The chief judge of the 5-member court, Joan Erickson, said in a written response to the petition that a hearing was held on Thursday. We've had a hearing already, during which the court had, quote, questions about the nexus that the government alleges between the actions of the respondent and the specific sections and subsections it invokes with respect to those actions. That's legalese for the judge going, hold on a minute, you're saying this person's a terrorist and an alien and needs to be deported? I'm not seeing that. That's my translation of the legalese from the chief judge of the deportation of the Alien Terrorist Deportation Court. Quote, the answers persuaded the court, so the government gave some answers. Holy cow. The answers persuaded the court that the government could benefit. I love the politeness. The government could benefit from the opportunity for more thoughtful consideration, wrote Chief Judge Erickson, who was a sitting federal judge in Minnesota. She directed the Justice Department to provide more information by Wednesday. That's 2 days away, folks. The court, now you're saying, where did this come from? Where did it start? And how does it work? You're not going to like some of these answers, but let's see. The court's authorities emerged from the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which permits the Attorney General, right? In past years, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. Great, Attorney General. He's the people's attorney. Not under this administration. Permits the Attorney General to file under seal applications for the deportation of a suspected alien terrorist. If an application is granted, the court must hold a public hearing. I like that. If an application is granted, we'll have a public hearing. That will be the most attended public court hearing, I think, in history. Here we go. At which the government has the burden to prove, that's good, that the individual satisfies the definition, right? Now, here's where I get really worried. What definition? Of terrorist? Because you know, if you've been following me any length of time, you know what the government is now calling terrorist, right? Left-wing terror is now a thing. Antifa is now a designated terrorist organization. You've heard me say before that Marco Rubio held a meeting with 66 other nations and implored them to start focusing on international left-wing terror, folks. We've had our first convictions. First one was Fort Worth, Texas, federal court. Multiple people convicted of material support to terrorism, a statute that's usually used for international terrorists. And the jury was told these people are Antifa. They had been protesting outside an ICE detention center, and a police officer was shot in that, and they received incredibly stiff sentences because, you know, Antifa. So I don't know who this person is, but I'm concerned. I'm concerned. And look, if indeed, let's say it was an Al-Qaeda, full-blown Al-Qaeda operative, right? Or Hamas, Hezbollah, we'd either be prosecuting them or we'd be getting them on a plane immediately and getting the hell out of here. Why are we going through the motions on this? I'm concerned. Applications must be approved by the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General. Well, under this administration, I'm even more concerned. Federal law says that an individual could qualify as an alien terrorist by, among other factors, having, quote, engaged in terrorist activity. See, again, it's it's the definition. You're using the word to define the word. That's a bad definition, folks, under this administration, right? Because as far as they're concerned, left wing is the worst possible threat to the world right now. You can do it by endorsing or espousing terrorist activity. Again, we're using the word to define the word. And by belonging to a political or social group, that encourages terrorist activity. The court has been dormant since its creation. That's also a clue, folks, that sane administrations throughout for the past several decades have said, yeah, that's a pull cord in case of emergency action, and we're not using it. But here we go. Having received until last week no applications and conducting no hearings, according to a summary posted on the Federal Judicial Center website. This is the part I know you'll like even less. The court is comprised of 5 judges selected by anybody? Chief Justice John Roberts gets to choose who sits on this court. I want to know more. Did he just appoint these people to a fresh court? I don't know. When did he appoint the sitting 5 people for now? But I'll be following it. If you want to know a little more about it, if you're a history nerd like me in terms of legalese, Congress created the removal court as a special court, authorized the Chief Justice to designate the court judges to review applications. They served for staggered, renewable 5-year terms. So I don't know, we'd have to literally, do the math there and see if this is a new bench or not, and must be drawn from different judicial circuits. The Chief Justice may appoint to the court the same judges designated to serve on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Those are your federal judges who approve or deny, mostly approve, FISA applications in national security wiretap cases. Interesting, isn't it? And then the Attorney General approves all the draft applications. Yeah. The Attorney General may appeal a judge's denial. Uh-oh. So even if this panel does the right thing, or the initial chief judge of the court up in Minnesota goes, yeah, no, sorry, you've not answered all my questions. I don't think this person's a terrorist. And maybe I'm not even sure it's an alien. The Attorney General can appeal. Or an alien may appeal the decision of the judge after a removal hearing. So either way, there can be appeals, and those appeals go to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. So there are some checks and balances here, folks, but I wanted to, at your request, I wanted to cover that with you because it's a big deal. This has never happened before. And we should not be surprised that Trump is doing that's something that's never happened before. All right, let's go to the next story. You may have seen news coverage over the weekend that allegedly, I say allegedly because importantly, the DHS and the FBI issued a joint statement denying this story. But it's coming out of both New York Times and NBC News, I believe, are responsible for these stories. Allegedly, FBI field office leaders were told that the FBI will no longer investigate ICE confrontations. Okay, there's a lot here to unpack. You'll recall, certainly, that with each and every one of these ICE shootings, it seems like the FBI has stepped in, and particularly in the cases of, started with Renee Good, in terms of public outcry, right? Investigate, neutral investigation. Where's the FBI? Let's get a field office to do it right. And then Preddy, and then if you fast forward, you get Houston a couple of weeks ago, and Lorenzo Salgado Arroyo, who was shot and killed by ICE. And it gives you, not under this particular FBI perhaps, but it does give you some semblance of assurance that there's another entity looking at DHS and ICE shootings. So now here comes this reporting that for journalists are dead certain on, based on their sources, that, yeah, timeout, FBI is not going to do these investigations anymore. So a couple of thoughts. First, under this administration, the need for another entity to look at ICE shootings is absolutely vital, and needs to happen. Again, on an ordinary planet, the Inspector General of DHS would be trusted to do, the IG office is supposed to be independent of all of the DHS law enforcement agencies, right? So they do the shooting usually, and it's either a good shoot, bad shoot, and there's remedial action required. You screwed this up, all that good stuff. I was, for example, when I was chief inspector of the FBI, I was responsible for overseeing teams that did all investigations of agent-involved shootings within the FBI. And it's really fascinating work, and it's very necessary work. And it was handled by the inspection division of the FBI, which is, again, considered quasi-neutral, right? Independent, certainly, of the field office. Okay. Now, the FBI is not going to do it anymore. And here's the problem. Again, If it's ordinary circumstances, I would say to the DHS IG, knock yourself out. You can't say that anymore. And the other thing is, by saying this, if true, the FBI is walking away from its authority as the civil rights enforcement arm of the United States. And some folks may not understand that. The FBI is the designated agency to investigate civil rights violations. And that includes not only hate crimes, but what's called color of law violations, the excessive use of force by law enforcement throughout the country. They're tough cases. Cops beating people up, cops using lethal force. It's tough stuff, but it's the FBI stuff. And I don't know how many, under this administration, how many excessive use of force cases the FBI and DOJ are going to bring against anybody. But I bet you it's going to be very few. And now, if this is true, it's going to be zero involving ICE agents. And in fact, all DHS entities, according to this report. What does this mean? Because the FBI spokesperson was asked about this. First, saying it's not true. It's not true. The FBI is absolutely going to investigate attacks on ICE agents. Okay, well, what? The attacks on ICE agents. That was the response, right? So understand that the tone of this reporting is, yeah, we're not going to see the FBI involved at all in any aspect of looking at whether it was a good shoot, bad shoot, right? When an ICE agent shoots, or for that matter, any DHS entity shoots somebody or beats somebody up. What's the response from FBI? Oh no, we're going to be looking at attacks on ICE agents. So, okay, that's not really the question that we asked you. What we want to know is the FBI going to be an agency that upholds its color of law civil rights authority? And you just told us we're going to investigate attacks on agents. Okay, yeah, that says volumes to me. Volumes. What could be behind this? I do have some opinions on this through observation and experience. Some field offices, could it be FBI Houston, have started, we know this isn't conjecture, has started full-blown real investigations of ICE shootings because it's business as usual in these field offices. Yeah, they kick into gear. Here's the civil rights squad. Here they go. And is it possible that FBI headquarters said, are you guys down there, are you actually doing a real investigation? Is that what you're doing? Is that possible? Because public reporting says that FBI Houston was actually sitting down with state and local and county authorities. Don't forget, in the Houston shooting of Lorenzo Salgado, the Harris County District Attorney has opened his own case, right? The governor, lo and behold, has said he wants Texas Rangers involved in investigating this. He's not happy that the Latino population is up in arms as we approach the midterms in Texas. And the FBI sat down with everybody. Hey, normal planet, right? And said, let's see what we got, folks. What do you got? We'll play nicely in the sandbox. And now, boom, here's a directive reportedly to all field offices. Knock that off. Stop doing that. Okay, folks, just conjecture, but based on public reporting. So, not good. The report says FBI managers around the country received a written notice informing them of the change on Thursday. Uh-oh. Watch that Harris County Houston case, man. Watch it. Watch it. That DA is not going to give up. And if you've got the governor, Abbott of Texas, going, yeah, I'll put Texas Rangers on this too. Uh-oh. You got the mayor of Houston going, I'll assign Houston PD to this too. Uh-oh. I think there's a connection, but I don't have proof of it, but I think there is. Yeah. And the thing is, it's even this directive was all encompassing and saying, hey, don't get engaged at all, on either side, did this person attack an ICE agent and then get shot? Or did an agent use excessive force because he or she was attacked, allegedly? If you don't get involved in either end of that, you lose all the evidence you would need to determine whether ICE is lying, right? Because if you start looking at, think about it. If you go, yeah, we're going to investigate whether or not an agent drove, a citizen or a non-citizen drove their car in an ICE agent. We're going to investigate that. Well, you're going to have to interview witnesses. You're going to have to pull security tapes, right? Recordings. And some of those people you talk to are going to say, he absolutely did not drive his van at anybody. There was no threat. And that's dangerous, because now what do you do with that? You have to open a civil rights case on the agent. So hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. That's allegedly what's been told to FBI supervisors. Since we're on the topic of ICE, I've got to cover even more, and I'm not going to let this one go, but this ICE shooting in Maine has turned into not only a question of whether or not this was a legitimate use of deadly force against a 20-something-year-old Colombian father up in Biddeford, Maine, but also whether this was a legitimate ICE agent, meaning, was there even a background or any semblance of a background investigation conducted on this relatively new ICE agent? This guy's new, but not new to law enforcement, and allegedly, according to his own family and ex-wives and court documents and past employers, has a history of violent actions and threats. Some I'm not even going to go into, but there are two ex-wives in this picture. Both of them have given some statements, even on video. There are court documents involving divorce proceedings or restraining orders against him. He's been in and out of different jobs, reportedly had problems at those jobs that resulted in him having to move along, shall we say. And what's interesting here is, when asked about his seemingly horrific background, and journalists asked DHS, hey, what's up with this guy? Did you conduct a background or what? The response is twofold. One, we're not going to respond to anything that involves doxing ICE agents. Okay, again, nobody's doxing any ICE agent. You've heard me say repeatedly, I am against violence against law enforcement, period. So no one's doing any doxing here. And you're not going to hear me name this guy, because that's all I need is some allegation that we're doxing people. I don't want to see him hurt. I want to see him out of law enforcement. And then the other response from DHS was, well, he's been a federal law enforcement officer, so, that's in response to a background question, right? That's a clue, folks. That's a clue that they didn't do a full field background in this recruitment frenzy that they're doing. And I started digging up the background investigation information right off of ICE's own website. And you know what it says? All the right stuff about, hey, it's going to be a deep background. You're going to have your, it even says like your ex-wife, your ex-girlfriend. It says it's going to be very thorough. And then you got to click through a couple of times to frequently asked questions. What if I already had a background done? Because, maybe I was in a federal job or law enforcement. And then the answer? Oh, well, then, yeah, we'll take that. Uh-oh. What was the federal job this guy was in? He was a VA, Veterans Administration police officer for a short time. And did they even look at his file there, folks? Did they even look at the court documents? Did they look at his ex-wife saying and his family members saying he had bipolar diagnoses as a child, and then he had an accident with a traumatic head injury What in the world? I want to play for you an audio recording from a phone conversation this agent had, and she and with one of the wives, and she had the wherewithal to record it. Tell me if this guy should be carrying a gun and a badge representing our government, folks. Here's the audio.
The most disgusting. I can't even begin to think how bad that fucking nasty ass smells that dude is putting his dick in. And that's why you left. That's why you left your kids in a fucking trailer in an RV over Thanksgiving. Just so some dude like Danny would put his dick in you. And guess what? I'm taking Danny's money. Yeah, we filed child support. Yeah, we did. We did. All your money is my money. Your money is now my money. You can go try to run. You can go try to not get a job. You can try to not file your tax returns. Have fun with the IRS. I have a court order. Come back and fight me. Come back and fight me, you little cunt. Come back and fight me. Come back and fight me, you little fat cunt. Come back and fight me. That's why I took our daughter. Look what you've done to her. It's the same thing Avis did. Every single female in your bloodline is nothing but a disgusting fat cunt.
Yeah, he goes on to say there, and I don't know if we've got that audio, that he talks of having her throat slit and her family member's bloodline. So that, it's what I'm saying is the audio actually gets worse. I don't know if I missed that, but the court documents back and forth in these marriages are really, really indicative of who this guy is. But understand the environment. It looks to me like we've got shortened training, particularly if you have law enforcement experience prior. Second, it looks like the background is either abbreviated or non-existent if you've had prior law enforcement. They just accept the fact that, and this is a problem nationwide. I'm going to be writing about this week in my column. This is a larger problem, folks, with what they call the wandering officer, the officer who is disciplined and or fired from one department and goes to the other, right? And they want to keep it quiet. So you'll be not shocked to know that you might say, my God, there should be a federal database of law enforcement misconduct that departments can tap into and realize who they're hiring. Yes, there should be. And you know that? There was a federal database that applied at least to federal law enforcement officers. And by the way, you'd be astounded at the numbers. There's numbers of agencies, who have some law enforcement. VA, for example. I can go on and on. Figure every executive agency has some gun and badge people, right? It's tens or hundreds of thousands. Think of the Bureau of Prisons Corrections officers, the largest entity in the Department of Justice. There was a database for misconduct of federal police. And you know what? Donald Trump did away with it last year. Joe Biden started it. Trump, in his first administration, after George Floyd, said, we should probably have a database. In his second administration, he got rid of the database. There we go. He disbanded the federal law enforcement misconduct data that was implemented by Biden. And if you say, well, okay, how about my hometown? How about my local police, county, state police? How about that? There is a national database. It's voluntary for departments to put their stuff in, but it only relates to decertification of your law enforcement authority in that state. So in other words, misconduct alone, even serious misconduct, but it does not result in your decertification as an officer, right? That doesn't get in. And I don't think this guy was decertified. So it's only for decert. You got to be really messed up if your law enforcement license is pulled and you're decertified. All right, let's move quickly. The Iran war is going to expand, and we've lost another service member over the weekend. This time in Iraq, and somehow involved in a controlled detonation of a explosive drone coming from Iran. Also, over the weekend, we learned that a missing service member in Jordan, we've already lost 2 people in Jordan, at a base. Our bases are taking a beating around the Middle East, folks. Embarrassing beating. Because remember, Trump said we obliterated all of the offensive capabilities. But then he also said, yeah, I left them some missiles. You got to have some. What? When he said that weeks ago, I was like, well, why did we leave them some missiles? But now we're seeing them. Well, also in Jordan, we found remains that probably are the missing U.S. service members. But here's the thing. Washington Post has a source, well-placed, who tells us that the expansion of U.S. operations, because we're expanding, will be limited by dwindling stockpiles of air defense and long-range munitions and constraints on the ability to surge more troops and aircraft into the area because of battle damage. Quote, we do not have enough to safely sustain operations, and I don't think the White House is aware of that. Unquote, the official told the Washington Post. Yeah. Folks, we have the most expensive military, the best armed in the world, $1 trillion budget, and we've run out of munitions. What do you think is going on right now in China and Russia, in Iran, in North Korea? They're salivating, watching our munitions run down as we continue to get attacked. There's no plan. There's only 2 conclusions. There was no plan to end this war, or they're engaged in a war for some reason that we're not aware of. Quickly, as we wrap up, the Tate brothers. Yes, Andrew Tate was arrested by U.S. Marshals in Miami. The UK is doing the right thing and wants them extradited. Watch closely. By the way, these are Andrew Tate specifically is accused of, trafficking, sexual assaults. I don't have all the details of the UK charges against him, but the UK is doing the right thing. Here's what to watch for in the days ahead. Will Trump, this guy's tightly associated with the whole manosphere and the bro culture. He's allegedly close with Barron Trump, Donald Trump's son. He has a successful podcast where he berates women and seems to espouse misogyny, if not worse. Let's see if Donald Trump makes a move to block this extradition with our strongest ally in the world. Let's see what happens here. Lastly, something a little bit lighter, but still ominous. If you watch the World Cup, and boy, even if you didn't watch the finals, what a great game until the end, when Donald J. Trump was allowed by the FIFA president to come on to the pitch, or the field, as I call it, and present the championship trophy to the winning team, Spain. Reportedly, he was rooting for Argentina because he doesn't like Spain. And God darn it, if he would not get off the stage with the winning team, he had to stay on for the photo ops. The head of the president of FIFA, who gave him the first ever FIFA Peace Prize, tried desperately to get him off the stage. The FIFA president knew this moment traditionally was for the team on the stage. And he tried pulling him off in either direction. You got to watch the video, folks. Here's my question to you.
In 2026, the champions of the world are Spain.
Look to the right.
Is now, so they can edit him out of that.
And earlier, what you can't see there is Trump starts out on the left, and the FIFA president tries to pull him off. Then Trump walks over to the right, stage right, and FIFA guy tries to make him go away. And one of the players gets involved, and he's not moving. And ultimately, they edited him out of the official photo. There's your official photo, folks. Do you see Trump in that picture? He's gone. Here's my question to you as we wrap for today. If this man won't leave the FIFA stage, is he going to leave the White House? Think about it. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you Wednesday on the Frank Figliuzzi Show.